Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here with us for this session on water, the 5 W's for water and nutrition security. So, let me briefly outline the objective of this session. We would like to bring focus to water for consumption and for food and nutrition security. From where I come from, and where perhaps many of you come from, many times the focus of water is for irrigation and for food production. But we are in the Food Systems Pavilion, and we are looking at the multiple entry points of water. Balancing the demand of water for production and water for consumption by humans, especially in water-stressed areas caused by climatic extremes such as drought and rising sea levels. And today we have a panel of experts with us, and we will try to delve a little deeper into the nuances of water for consumption with the intention to frame the narrative based on the 5 W's. Who, and it's very important that we start with the who, so we are people-centered, the what, where, when, and why. To kick off today's session, allow me to share a video message from Marika de Graaf, Senior Policy Advisor, Food Security and Nutrition from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands.
My name is Marijke de Graaf. I work as Senior Advisor on Food and Nutrition Security with the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I'm delighted to participate virtually in this session and share our thoughts on why we need to focus on water and nutrition security. Good nutrition is not just about how much food is available to consume, but rather about ensuring the right food goes into the body and stays in. Good nutrition helps develop strong brains and bodies, allowing a child not just to survive, but also to reach his or her full potential. Access to drinking water, sanitation and hygiene contribute to healthy lives. Without toilets, water sources become contaminated. Without clean water, basic hygiene practices are not possible. Undernutrition is caused by a lack of sufficient, safe and nutritious food, providing all necessary energy, proteins and micronutrients. In addition, poor care practices and diseases, such as diarrhea, lead to undernutrition. These are related to inadequate access to safe drinking water, sanitation and hygiene. 50% of undernourishment is associated with recurrent onsets of diarrhea, which inhibits a child's ability to absorb nutrients. When children are undernourished, they are even more likely to suffer from diarrhea and other infections. These insights are shared among key actors such as Sanitation and Water for All and the Scaling Up Nutrition movement. They indicate that co-location of wash and nutrition services will ensure there is more impact in areas of high malnutrition prevalence. The first 1,000 days from pregnancy through to a child's second birthday is the critical moment where a child's nourishment determines the child's destiny. An increased focus on the first 1,000 days will ensure more children reach their full potential. Behavior change interventions combining wash and nutrition messages are important to educate communities on how to combat the underlying causes of malnutrition, breaking the cycle of recurring illness. Although there is consensus that food insecure households need support to improve their wash as well as their nutrition security situation, in practice this is still a challenge. Recent studies commissioned by UNICEF indicate that simply combining wash and nutrition interventions in the same geographical area is not enough. More strategic programming is required, securing coherence in the wash and nutrition approaches. From the Netherlands, we support UNICEF to integrate wash and nutrition within the Dutch-funded programs at country level. We would like to highlight their learnings, summarized in a brief entitled Strengthening the Water and Sanitation System to Improve the Nutrition of Infants and Young Children. The brief facilitates the understanding of what transformative WASH is and how it can be applied through joint programming to also contribute to improved nutrition. The recent experiences from Burkina Faso provide a good example of the potential. In Gourma province, WASH activities were combined with nutrition messages and production of nutritious food. This combination drastically reduced the number of diarrhea cases from over 30,000 to 7,000 in the year 2022. Joint orientation activities, including home visits, covered topics such as breastfeeding, infant feeding, hand washing and at critical times, and the use of clean water and food hygiene. We look forward to more inspiring examples of integrated actions and further exchange with you all. Let me finalize by wishing you all a fruitful session and a call for the inclusion of WASH and nutrition topics within the broader COP agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marika. It's quite sobering to hear the numbers of children who are affected with morbidity and mortality by not having safe drinking water. But it's also sobering to hear that multiple approaches with entering into different angles of the food systems can have such positive effects. Next, I'd like to invite Rachel McDonald, the Deputy Director General, International Water Management Institute, IMI, CGIAR, to share with us her perspectives of managing water in food systems, especially for food and nutrition security in the face of climate change. Rachel?
Where's the...
It's coming up. I have to...
Yep. So thank you very much, Shakuntala. Thank you very much for inviting IMI, the International Water Management Institute, to be part of this. We're a water organization, so food systems, that's something that we get involved with. But we are part of the CGIAR, which means that we therefore get involved with linking across there. Now, just down there is the water pavilion. And now we will spend a lot of our time saying, but what about agriculture? What about agriculture? And we're here talking about what is food. So these, this looks like to be a scrambling of my data. Okay, that's fine. You don't need to know them because you probably already know the horrific numbers on deaths from either poor food or poor water. And it's not just that, it's the other impacts that come from it, whether it's stunting or whatever it might be. But we can just see that 9 million die every year from hunger. Expected that 1 million will die from diarrhea. The world, I mean, we've got 3.6 billion people, half the world's population, lack access to sanitation. 1.8 billion lack access to safe drinking water. But we don't join the dots. You know, we talk about food and we talk about water. They're not disconnected. Somebody who has access to poor water will often have access to poor food. And you don't just die from one thing or stunted by one thing. You've got a lot of dots there. Our bodies or our societies or our systems are very integrated with what that's going to be. And this is the messy area of water and food systems. So we have our water systems, and here we think about availability. Is there enough water to drink? And what is the quality of that water? And is there enough water available to be able to then get involved with our food systems? So whether it's food production, which is so much of what we focus on, but it's food processing, food preparation, drinking and wash, and then these other integrated areas that we have to be linking it. And in the middle of all of this are people. And in the middle of all this are communities that are interacted by political systems, social systems, and economic systems that all impact the health of those people that we're dealing with. So as we're beginning to unpack this, we need to be able to look at which part of those arrows, what are we dealing with? How are we influencing that? Food security is completely different to the way it is defined to water security, and yet they are so involved. And then we throw in climate change. So climate change is coming along and really challenging what we do, whether it's we're having to use untreated wastewater to irrigate our crops because there's just no water to do our crop. We have food scarcity. We have lack of water to keep clean and to wash ourselves. And we're also seeing this remarkable change in pathogen growth. Those different waterborne diseases, those water-carried diseases, the way they are impacting us are being completely transformed by changes in temperature, the availability of water, salinity of water, sea level rise. And I don't feel that we have a good grasp on this at the moment. So if we don't really understand how these systems are connected, the food, the water, the climate, the health, the environment that we're dealing with, how are we going to be able to come up with solutions that really hit all of them and not just one part of it, because the people are part of all of that. We then look at extremes. So Shakuntala, you talked about how climate extremes are really bringing those changes. And the way climate, those impacts of changes in temperature, changes in precipitation, it's often through water extremes. So we'll see these floods. People, they're not just dying from not their inability to be able to swim, or they're being caught up into these raging torrents, but it's also more people will die from those waterborne diseases, those vector-borne diseases such as typhoid, cholera, hepatitis A, and then of course what comes with those swamp waters, those poorly flowing waters, are dengue and malaria and West Nile fever and yellow fever, and of course on top of that you have the lack of nutrition. People have lack of access to good water, but they're also having lack of access to food. So we can see how once the flood comes, there are these knock-on impacts on people. And then when the drought comes, and I'm a drought specialist, so you're going to have, this is a very complicated slide. What we're seeing is we've got these different types of droughts, and we've got these different exposure pathways. Respiratory diseases from health. You've got more frequent heat waves. You've got vector-borne diseases. You've got production. You've got wildfires. People are dying from this. And then you've got those various health outcomes. You will know about that much more than I will. But one of the things that's often missed is mental health as well. The suicides that come during drought by farmers because they can't afford their loans, by others, mental health is a massive issue. And I've just been in a most inspiring session on the Sharm el-Sheikh adaptation agenda, in which, under the dubious title of Miss Climate Kenya, this Maasai young woman told us all about the current impacts in Kenya, in the Maasai region of El Nino. She lost a cousin last week from the floods. But what's also happening is there's this whole change in community behavior, particularly for young women. So young women, her father has only 30 cattle, and women like her, young girls like her, are being married earlier. They're being married earlier, and before they can get married, they have to go through female genitalia mutilation. So they have to go through the cut. And so there's all sorts of diseases and infections coming from this indirect impacts of drought. So the young women, what we see in many of the other countries that I've worked in, there's polygamy, there's all sorts of other STDs or whatever that comes from these impacts on drought. So as we're talking about health, let's think beyond the disease. Let's think in some of those other areas. So we can see that droughts and floods and water and food insecurity does not impact everybody equally. So we need to then bring in these types of social vulnerability. We have our exposure to our rainfall, to our temperature, to our extreme events. Our sensitivity is linked to how well do our water treatment systems work? How much does our wastewater impact? Because that's often where many of the pathogens and the viruses come from, and then our adaptation, our social capital, our governance and education. And this is based on water. And what we need to do is we need to then bring into this where food systems come into these different areas of exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity. And then on top of that, not only do we have our extremes, we're getting changes in antimicrobial resistance to people who drink water in which you have many antibiotics, whether it's from fish systems or wastewater treatment, from human systems, but also increasingly from animal systems. Those antibiotics that we're giving are these different ones. They're coming into the water, we then drink the water, and we are indirectly taking on board those antibiotics, leading to this major surge in antimicrobial resistance. So this interconnected water, food, and then the consumption by humans is really changing what we're doing. So we need to start joining the dots. Too often you hear on that pavilion down there is SDG 6, and on these pavilions is SDG 2. We have to join those, and we then have SDG 13. We need our communities to speak more together. We need to be able to link them together, and that we have so many areas in common that we can, but it's the funding, it's the way our donors work, it's the way communities work sometimes that we need to bring into that. So Shakuntala, I'm going to give you 5 new W's. Okay? We had the why, the wet, and all of those. I think we should bring in these. Our ability and health we need to bring in the women. Absolutely. We see too often it's there. We need to bring in water. Please don't leave water behind, and we want to work with you. Wealth is such a major determinant. Even in the same countries, even our exposure and our sensitivities to do that. Wisdom is critical. And that local knowledge and local practitioner, that local work has to be part of that. And of course, working together. So thank you very much. And I hope you like our 5 W's as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And also thank you for the 5 alternative of W's, because they were so positive. And because listening to your presentation, I was thinking from the one slide to the other, gosh, can it get worse than this? Is it as bad as this? And then you came up with these 5 alternatives, which truly point to the way to solutions and actions that we all can take and take together. So thank you so very much. My next guest is Vali Carucci. Vali, may I invite you? Yeah. And allow me, you have slides, don't you?
Well, they will roll.
They will roll. Okay, so if you can be there. Vali is the Director for Food Systems and Resilience Service of the Policy and Program Division of World Food Programme. So, Vali, I invite you to share your thoughts on this subject, especially on the kinds of investments and solutions that are needed to make water available and accessible for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this invitation. You set the stage in an amazing manner. At the beginning, it was really difficult, but I think we need these punchlines to understand the complexity. Actually, you have stolen one of my initial, statements, which actually we need to begin linking the dots. Even if you're talking about conventions, the climate, the biodiversity, the desertification, why? It should be combining things, And I think, I forget my notes. It's really calling for understanding that this is getting increasingly complex, but it starts from perhaps the two big ends, the who, and you said one word that was one of the first W is women in the first place, and then the why is because without women and without tackling the problem at the source, which we're talking about ecosystems, landscapes, we're not going to do anything about water or nutrition. One aspect that perhaps needs to be re-emphasized here is landscapes, people, soils. I mean, if we look at the climate patterns and you look at where the climate patterns now exacerbates context of fragility, you look also where WFP beneficiaries the most are. 70–80% of our participants in our programs are in drylands, moisture stress areas. And the rest are in areas that are also subject to cyclones or excess water, flooding. And half of them have both. It's a twinning between, devastating floods and droughts, and again floods, because the soil conditions change. We are dealing with 100 million hectares just in Africa of degraded lands, moderately or severely degraded. Now, obviously, any even minor climate variation will have 3 or more fold times repercussion on very fragile ecosystems, where anthropic pressure has, deforested, has removed biomass. And when you have water falling on those landscapes, water migrates, and while water migrates, soil migrates, and when soil migrates, people migrate. I'm simplifying here to the extreme, but people are moving, and are moving as a result of ecosystems degradation compounded by climate shocks. In some of these areas, you see some of the solutions. That's why I don't want to provide only perspective of problems. It's that no country or no community is defeated. You have the possibility to reverse incredible conditions of desertification, where actually women need to walk on average 3 to 5, sometimes more hours, with a little girl that doesn't go to school because of that, in search of water. And every day, and every couple of days in search of firewood, in search of other things, going to markets. So what people don't see very much when we're talking about hunger, when talking about water, when we're talking about climate, is the hardships on the most vulnerable. The concept of hardships is not coming up very strongly in our narrative. 200 million hours every day walked by women and girls just to fetch water worldwide. Okay, 100 million hectares just in Africa, 300 million worldwide degraded, means hundreds of billions of cubic meters of water going out of our systems. And we need to remember that these are, our landscapes are sponges. Soils are living entities. 20, 50 centimeters at best in most of the places where we work, for example. It will take 10, 20, 30 years max to get into extinction in terms of their capacity to respond to rainfall. So one of the arguments that one of my dear colleagues, Adamou in Niger, was saying, and he said in French, I will translate, soon we'll be in a position where some of these crusted pavement degraded landscapes will not care about climate change, because we'll be like shooting at a dead corpse. Okay? So that was a shock for me hearing that. I said, but we can reverse. With the right technologies, and some of these are simple technologies. They look simple, but they're complex to implement. A single mistake can generate trouble. But the recalibration of these measures was necessary, and scale was necessary, because the scale allowed the water tables to replenish. The water table to replenish, to have then the boreholes, because part of it goes into the deep water table. There are 3 water tables in the Sahel context: superficial, medium, and the continental one very far. So it was possible using a program that we have launched in 2014, initial stage, and now scaled up to 3,000 communities by now, 3.2 million people, to really have hundreds and hundreds of boreholes, 1,000 shallow wells, 3,000 water points, simply because things were in equilibrium, in a better equilibrium. We are not out of the woods yet. But it's phenomenal to see how nature can heal. And nature-based solutions is not just about drilling, boreholes to have, and I've seen many wash attempts failure because they were just everybody with the same straw in the same glass of water. It doesn't work. You need to have an ecosystem-based approach. You need to have professionalization of these efforts. We need to re-involve institutions from the local level and communities using AI, ancient innovation. Yes, okay? Which is a combination, I'm being provoking here. You combine that ancient innovation with an articulation of modern technologies to complement that. I mean, it's amazing to see that in just in a few years, 300,000 hectares being rehabilitated. And that means multiplied by 3, close to 1 million hectares being stabilized. You more or less have a relationship with one-third catchment treatment, et cetera, et cetera. But the opportunities for youth to stay, to have jobs, better nutrition, from places that only had 1 or 2 crops. Do you think you really can show people how to better eat through the social behavior change kind of approach without having diversity? When we start bringing all of these things together, including in 3 out of the 5 countries, a mega partnership with UNICEF and with GIZ and with IFAD, okay? Many things can start falling into place. The wash, the diversification, the market. But there was a relationship between quality, scale, and the type of interventions that was very important to take into consideration. Not to get into scattered approaches, but more concentrated clusters of villages that belong to the same territorial unit, that also socially cultural units. And we need to recognize the concept of terroir, the concept of affiliation, that is different in different parts of Africa, but it has a relationship with landscapes. And the same is in the Middle East, and the same is in Central Latin America and South America. I was just back from Colombia last week. It was amazing to go through these territories of the Kogi, for example, indigenous communities. The way they do permaculture there, okay, and they protect their environment, and they link one to another. I mean, there are countless examples where we need to learn and then trying to scale up. But if we don't link the dots, what was said before, we're not going to succeed. And we need that working together, that should not be working together from the matter of a rhetoric, but from a matter of action. We need to operationalize that working together. I'm hearing a lot of this working together, but working together in some of those most difficult places is a huge challenge. One last example is that we're increasingly working together with academia. So we have 20 universities in Africa, we started this, that actually deploy their young talents in the places that are most difficult to reach, most hard, difficult, and they do their master degree and now their PhDs. We have 180 students that reach their masters just deployed in those areas. We are learning so much from those young, energetic talents. These are our acacias or our baobabs that are going to be planted where they're going to be needed the most in the future. How can we do more of that? Local solutions for local problems and local opportunities as well. So the narratives are shifting. We need to hear that huge background noise and desiderata for having more of the localized, owned, and supported efforts, as opposed to parachuted solutions that often we have seen, at least in my lifetime, quite a few. I'm being very honest here and trying to be open as much as I could. I've been enjoying the Sahel. Here you can see, for instance, each drop matters. So this is one site in Niger out of the 1,500, I don't remember even how many they have now. It shows you a simple technique, the half moon, that have been recalibrated to absorb up to 150 millimeter rainfall event. You need to be careful also there. A new compendium has been created, thanks to the universities and the Ministry of Environment and Agriculture in Niger, to recalibrate all the standards, because the standards were not good enough. They were still studying on the standards of the books of the 80s and the 90s. So we have now 20 types of variation of that simple technology. Technologies like the ZyPit integrated from Yakuba Sawadogo, a genius old man, integrated into these new models. So again, it's food for thought. It's a huge subject, but just to illustrate that it's possible to reverse what people consider irreversible at times, and the effects on water are going to be massive. From a little study that, assessment that we did, in the last 5 years, we have intercepted worth of 2.7 billion cubic meters of water, of which 470 million cubic meters have been percolating down. It's not too bad for an interventions. This helps nutrition. No healthy diets without healthy soils or healthy ecosystems. And when you say healthy ecosystems, it's people together with their surroundings. That, you know, that thing that we call land, that is also hope, affiliation, family, everything. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Volley, and for reminding us about the complexities. And yet in the complexities, there is so much multiple choices that we can choose, that we can have, and also using these in different combinations that make best sense for the people and for the region in which we work. Thank you so much. We now have Elizabeth Bryan. Elizabeth is a senior scientist from the International Food Policy Research Institute, CGIAR. And Elizabeth will share her views on the linkages between water and food security and nutrition. Elizabeth?
Great. Thank you so much. And these overview presentations have been really, really excellent, and it really provides a good overview. I'm going to be talking about work that we've done at IFPRI that looks at the linkages between water security and food security, and really focusing on productive uses of water as an entry point for better nutrition, but also then thinking about how that links to domestic uses of water as well. So we know, and as have been said, experiences of food and water insecurity are projected to become more frequent, widespread, and acute because of climate change, environmental degradation, and demand from growing populations and other uses. So we collected panel data from 4 countries, Ghana, Niger, Nigeria, and Senegal, using phone surveys during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we collected measures of water insecurity and food insecurity using experiential measures like the Household Water Insecurity Experience Scale, or HWISE, and the FIES, or the Food Insecurity Experience Scale. And what we found is that there's really high levels of water and food insecurity in all of these countries. At the baseline, we saw that 37% of individuals were living in water insecure households. And among these, 91% had some experience of food insecurity as well. Diet diversity was moderate, with about 5 out of 10 food groups being consumed on average. And then our regression analysis shows that individuals living in water insecure households had 1.7 times higher odds of being food insecure as well. And they were estimated to consume 0.38 fewer food groups than those who were living in water secure households. So there's a really clear link between water security and food insecurity experiences. So there's many pathways through which water security can influence food security and nutrition outcomes. And this one sort of focuses more on the productive uses of water and water management for productive purposes. One of these pathways is a production pathway. So increases or changes in agricultural production as a result of the introduction of irrigation, for example, can shift production to the production of more nutrient-dense foods and expand the production calendar into the dry season, which can then make food more available throughout the year and the production of more nutritious foods like fruits and vegetables. The second pathway is an income pathway. So increases in income as a result of the use of productive uses of water, like irrigation, can enable households to purchase healthier diets, which can lead to better nutrition. There's also an important pathway here, which is the water supply pathway. There is a potential for irrigation to improve water for other uses as well. It can also create risks, so we do need to be careful with multiple use systems and making sure that they're intentionally designed. And lastly, women's empowerment intersects with all of these other pathways. Women make choices about what to plant. They might be different than what men might choose. They have implications for diets and food security. They also can spend income in different ways than men, and so that is an important pathway through which we can affect diets and nutrition. So IFPRI conducted research on the linkages between small-scale irrigation and nutrition under the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for small-scale irrigation, which IMI was also a key partner in that. And this research focused in Ethiopia, Ghana, and Tanzania, and then we later added another focal country of Mali. And what we found is that small-scale irrigation improves household dietary diversity in all of these countries. But the pathways that were at play were different. So in Ethiopia, the income pathway was really salient at leading to improvements in household dietary diversity. Whereas we saw evidence in Ghana and Mali, for example, that the production pathway was also in play. So when households had access to irrigation, they planted different crops that they then consumed, and they purchased different things in the market. We also found that in Ethiopia, women's diet quality is very poor, and especially at certain times during the year, so in the fasting and the lean seasons. However, the association between season and diets was mediated by irrigation. So women in households that were irrigating were more likely to meet minimum diet standards during those lean and fasting seasons of the year. And we also found that women in households practicing higher dietary diversity, practicing irrigation had higher dietary diversity scores, and especially among those households that experienced a drought within the last 5 years. So irrigation was protective of women's diets during times of drought. We also found direct impacts of irrigation on child nutrition. Specifically, we found that irrigation improves weight for height Z-scores of children under the age of 5 in both Ethiopia and Tanzania. In Tanzania, the result was only significant for those households that had experienced a drought. In Ethiopia, it was significant for irrigating households under both drought and non-drought conditions, but you can see that the drought-affected households were much more likely to have children who had better weight for height Z-scores. So this suggests that irrigation is really important to protect children's diets and nutrition during climate shocks such as drought. And so it can be a really powerful and important adaptation strategy as well. So there are many ways that better water management, productive uses of water, and sort of approaches to integrating nutrition into those can improve food security and nutrition outcomes, as you can see in this diagram. But I just want to focus on one at the bottom. I don't know if you can see it in the back, which is the design of formal multiple-use water systems that are culturally appropriate and safe. So we know, as I've just shown, irrigation can improve nutrition directly, but we also think that there's a potential pathway there for households that have access to irrigation water to use it for multiple purposes, and this can have multiple benefits. The data and the evidence linking this irrigation, wash, and nutrition pathway is more scant. There's not a lot of evidence that really draws out that pathway. But our data from Ethiopia, and when we looked at this, showed that households that do have access to irrigation are more likely to have sufficient domestic water and improved sanitation facilities. But a lot needs to happen for these improvements in water supply through irrigation to lead to improved nutrition. And we actually found that rather than irrigation status, the source of domestic water was the most important factor for households' hygiene practices like hand washing. And specifically, we found that households that use surface water for both irrigation and domestic purposes have the worst hygiene practices and the worst health outcomes measured by diarrhea in children. So in this case, multiple use systems would be much more feasible if groundwater is the source of water for irrigation and domestic uses. And for small-scale irrigation to effectively support WASH and improve the WASH environment, we just need more investments in water supply and sanitation infrastructure in addition to the irrigation infrastructure. So to sum up, we found very strong links between water and food security and nutrition. Small-scale irrigation, we can really consider this a nutrition-sensitive intervention. I think the evidence has grown and is strong that this really is a powerful tool for boosting nutrition. It's also an important adaptation strategy. We've done surveys across many different countries in Africa, and one of the things that farmers tell us they really want is access to irrigation. And this is going to be really critical as water resources become more scarce, and it has to be done in a sustainable way. As I said, irrigation is unlikely to improve nutrition through the WASH pathway unless these multiple systems are very carefully and intentionally designed, and to avoid some of the risks like vector-borne diseases and things like that, or poor quality water being used for consumption. I didn't really get to talk about the fourth pathway, the women's empowerment pathway, as much as I would like, and I'm so delighted that both of you mentioned women and gender as being very, very important. Women tend to not have access to small-scale irrigation or other types of irrigation. They have less access to land and water. They walk long distances to collect water. So we really need to think about how to overcome those challenges and make sure that women are involved in water management decisions, that they benefit from irrigation and water management interventions, and that probably needs complementary programming and additional things to make sure that this is happening, because just giving out a technology is not going to do the trick. And I'm happy to talk about that more during the discussion. Thank you so much.
Excuse me. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, and it was inspiring to see that you had such robust data, and that you could use the data and the results from the analyses of the data that you have to reach the solutions and put the solutions in context with each other and what they mean and how you can combine that. That was really fascinating. Thank you so much. I'd like to give a round of applause to our three presenters and invite them to come to the stage. Are we going to? Yeah. So what about the mics? I'd like to begin by asking some more specific questions to our three panelists, and then I'll open it up to the floor for questions from the audience. And I'd like to start with Rachel. Rachel, you described, we started with the 5 W's and you added your W's, but one important W that went through all presentations was women. So that's one that we all can react on. But Rachel, I would like to ask you, from the work that you do, who should we be targeting? We know women are important, but it's just not women we should be targeting. Who should we be targeting to engage with in order to strengthen this narrative and make sure that it reaches the negotiation table?
There are many strong people here who are bringing a different but the same voice and taking them into the negotiations, and you only have to hear them, hear their influences. I've just come from a session. There was such brilliant youth organizations there, and they were highlighting their energy I'm so inspired by and envious of, but it's just like the clear focus of where they need to go and what they need to do, and those barriers. We were on in a session talking about barriers to achieving water and food security, and it's just like we're going to go through them. And some of this is about local governance. We were talking about, there was a representative from a local government organization. They are there. ICLEI is there, really changing, because so much is that local context. But the problem is when we're working in a local context, it's often resource staff. So, you know, it's very difficult. So the national players were also in this discussion just now. And being able to catalyze and make sure on the agenda of the negotiators in those there are all the ideas and evidence that can be put in to be able to really mobilize those actions. We're seeing the pledges of funds, we're seeing the pledges of support, and this of what it happens, and it takes place therefore at both the national level through the negotiators, but at this conference, if it wasn't for this spotlight being shone on climate change, we wouldn't be able to have that. So who do we talk to? We need everybody's voice in the room, particularly those most vulnerable.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And thank you for making the point, especially about the youth. Well, early this morning, we had a session here with youth talking about agrobiodiversity. And it was amazing to hear how clear they were in how they understood the issues and the solutions that they can offer so that we can move further with the agenda. Volley, you gave us a wonderful presentation on solutions and investments. And my question to you is, can you give some more examples about where can we quickly bring these solutions to create impact? And also, what do we need to do in order to create this impact and at scale?
Thank you for the question. And again, fantastic presentation from both of you, and really enjoyed. I think every context has great examples. We are not necessarily very good institutionally to document what works and trying to see in what works, which are the elements of scalability. Sometimes, and this I was discussing with Elizabeth before, that when I was in the Sahel the last 5 years before coming to headquarters, and then before that, I was 16 years in Ethiopia. And people say, oh, long time. It was not. But Ethiopia has been one of the most incredible examples of, reversing what was to be the cradle of hunger, into something spectacular. And I was privileged to be part of a major program there to rehabilitate land, but also to see the wash coming in and the health coming in. And they came from far. And those are extraordinary practices, unfortunately not perhaps well appreciated, documented to scale them up. But some of the ingredients that we saw there through the community-based participatory planning, the ingredients that we saw in Bangladesh through the flood protection schemes and other type of activities there at the local level, what we saw in Guatemala with Comunidades Resilientes that we had as a program there together with the government, and then in Colombia, in those indigenous communities, there are a few common denominators that seems to emerge all the time, although the contexts are different. One is dialogues. The second one, recognizing people's livelihood system and landscapes, and the relationship that those speak to each other, okay, and they need to be nurtured. The third one is really we need to change and adapt our solutions, but rather than thinking about our solutions, is their solution with our contribution. And this narrative is so difficult to get actually, So when we speak about malnutrition, for example, in many communities of the Sahel, one of the things that I do all the time with my nutrition colleagues is say, how much malnutrition is all around there? As 15% is so 50%, 50 household out of 100. Now, where are these 15 households out of 100. I'm simplifying here for the sake of the discussion. They said in the poorest and the extreme poor, how many are there? 30%, 40% of the total community. Okay, so it means that 20 or 15 of those extreme poor are not malnourished. Yes? Okay, but we call it positive deviance. Why do you call positive deviance? You know, first of all, you should call it something a bit more positive instead of a deviance. But anyway, that's a statistical terminology, which I don't like. But and they say, have we found out why? Okay, so are we really building upon already on incredible resiliency out there when any of us, probably, except maybe a few around this room, will starve to death within a month? Okay. And they don't. So there are strengths out there that we need to recognize. We need to investigate. We need to scavenge and deal and then bring additional things from outside. They're not against outside world. I mean, we think that sometimes the rhetoric fuels around some of these debates. So solutions are out there. In Malawi, we have, when Hurricane Frida struck, we had hundreds of communities that didn't suffer from the flooding. They were stable. They had access to financial issues. They had protected the catchment, what they call deep trenching and hillside back-looking terracing. They held, the fort. They managed to avert major issues that other neighboring communities didn't have. Can we learn more from that? I've seen in Guatemala an old program, 1992, 2 years program only, done exquisitely well. I mean, throughout the WP support, there was also FAO there, and then the government. And they managed to withstand 200 communities. Hurricane Mitch changed river courses. They managed to withstand Hurricane Agatha, Stan, Tededose, and all that followed. This was incredible. They were blindés, armored. Like in West Africa, they said, no communautés sont blindées. They are armored against all these issues, no? And that is a rich bank account of experiences that we need to tap on. So we don't have a recipe, a magic silver bullet for every condition, but to learn, first of all, and to be humble and adapt, because risks are not even risks anymore. They are certainties. Okay, whilst we build resilience and reverse some of these trends by as many as possible dots linked up, but at least linking 3 or 4 to start with, the more we are going to get in the right path.
Thank you so much, Polly. And next to you, Elizabeth. You presented really very well the nuances with your research data and the different pathways that they point towards that show us the links between water and food and nutrition security. What more research, or in which line of research do you think we need to move and get stronger data and move so that we can have water find a space at the negotiation table? And when do you think this would happen? I've worked with transformation of food systems, trying to get that to space. What would you say? How can we move with the research, and when can we get to space?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I really appreciated Rachel's presentation because all the complexity of water for all of its uses and how all of these things are interlinked and can affect food security and nutrition is really important. And from my own observation, I see water still being very siloed. Mm-hmm. You know, you have your productive uses of water in one unit, and then you have your wash unit, and all of these things are really interlinked. And so that's where the research, I think, is needed to really break down these barriers between the productive and domestic uses of water, because water is for everything. And we need to have this balance, and we need to be researching this balance. And so when I mentioned the work that we looked at, does irrigation actually lead to improvements in the wash environment? We didn't find much out there when we started this. And what we had was not enough to really solidly answer that question. So I think we need more data, more research, including qualitative and quantitative data on how these things are linked, what households value, how they're using water, because they don't see these distinctions. We put these distinctions. And so I think it's important for us to break down those silos when we do our work and when we do our research. The question of when is tricky. I mean, the when needs to be now. I think, unfortunately, we saw UAE, what was it, 150 million was pledged to invest in water security at COP28, which is great. We should be seeing pledges from places that are not entirely water stressed right now that will become water stressed because of climate change. And so I think we need more countries stepping up to invest in water security because we still have so many people who lack it. And it's really shameful. So we need to work now to start addressing these challenges.
Thank you. And let's thank our three panelists. And I know we are running short of time, but I'd really like to take one or two questions from the audience. Richard, can you?
Thank you so much. My name is Letitia, and I'm with an organization called Sea Change. We're based in Canada, but I grew up in Ghana in a small village. And as you were presenting on the water irrigation system, my community actually faces drought from October until February, March, where water is very scarce. And growing up, a lot of our time as children was spent fetching water and lining up to get water. And I do remember different NGO groups who came into our community and set up systems that has now been abandoned because there wasn't maybe training, or the sustainability of these sort of measures maybe was not well thought through. So my community still deals with water shortages and drought every year. And when you were presenting, and I remember from your conversation, local solutions for local problems, was there, as part of your study, anything in looking at the local solutions to maybe some of the water challenges that they were having? Was that part of the study at all? Was one of my question. And then the other part of my question is that a lot of the rural women, especially in southern Ghana, they farm with the forest floor. How would an irrigation system like this work in such an environment when the method of farming is quite different? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So our study was actually in northern Ghana, in the Upper East and the northern regions, and there's a very long dry season where people were already irrigating but using manual methods. So it was very labor intensive, like physically digging a hand-dug well in the dry riverbed for irrigation in the dry season. And so we worked with IDE to roll out motor pumps in this area, and then the ILSI also had some other interventions in the northern region. But when we looked at it, yeah, this was what was already taking place. These were the local solutions, and they were not, they had a lot of challenges. Women were doing a lot of the work to start in small-scale irrigation, so it was very labor-intensive, and they were doing a lot of this irrigation. Our hypothesis was that introducing motor pumps would save a lot of women's time, would enable them to increase their production and income from irrigation during the dry season. And what we found was that a lot of women gave the pumps to their husband and just went and did something else. But for them, it wasn't necessarily a bad thing because they didn't want to be irrigating in the first place. It's very, very arduous. So there were a lot of unexpected results when we introduced these technologies. But I think, okay, I'm getting a symbol to end. But yeah, we can certainly talk more about the research that we've done. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you so much, and thank you to the panelists once more, and thank you so much for joining us. As I said, I work with food systems, and it took us 3 years just to get started to bring in food systems and agriculture to the climate change table. So I don't hope we have to wait so long with water, and I do hope that with the experiences we've had in other topics, that we can use that as we move forward. And thank you so much for sharing with us your experiences and your solutions. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.